The wind arrived after dark, pushing a wall of water across the low islands of the Ganges-Brahmaputra Delta. Entire villages disappeared beneath a storm surge that rose higher than the roofs built to withstand the annual monsoon. By dawn on November 13, 1970, hundreds of thousands of people were missing. In a single night, one of the deadliest tropical cyclones in recorded history had swept across what was then East Pakistan, leaving a landscape stripped of homes, crops, and families. The Bhola Cyclone did not simply devastate a coastline. It reshaped a nation's political future and exposed the fragility of millions living on the world's largest river delta. The region struck by the storm lay in the southern districts of East Pakistan, an area defined by flat, river-laced islands known as characters. These lands, formed by sediment carried from the Himalayas, are fertile but barely above sea level. Seasonal flooding was a fact of life. The Bay of Bengal, funnel-shaped and shallow along its northern edge, has historically amplified storm surges. For centuries, cyclones have crossed these waters, but in 1970 the combination of meteorological intensity, geography, and vulnerability proved catastrophic. In November 1970, East Pakistan was already strained by political and economic disparity within Pakistan. Since the country's creation in 1947, power had been concentrated in West Pakistan, more than 1,000 miles away across Indian territory. East Pakistan, though more populous, received less investment in infrastructure, including coastal defenses and early warning systems. Poverty was widespread. Most rural families depended on small-scale agriculture and fishing, living in homes built of bamboo and thatch. Embankments and cyclone shelters were limited in number, and many coastal communities lacked access to reliable communication networks. The tropical disturbance that would become the Bhola Cyclone formed over the central Bay of Bengal in early November. Meteorological records indicate that it developed from a low-pressure system around November 8, gradually intensifying as it moved northward over warm waters. By November 10, it had strengthened into a severe cyclonic storm. Satellite technology was still limited in 1970, and while regional weather services monitored the storm, forecasting capacity and dissemination systems were rudimentary compared to modern standards. As the cyclone approached the northern Bay of Bengal, it intensified further. By November 12, sustained wind speeds were estimated at around 115 miles per hour, equivalent to a Category 3 hurricane on the Saffir-Simpson scale. The central pressure dropped significantly, indicating a powerful storm. Its trajectory aimed directly toward the densely populated coast of East Pakistan. Warnings were issued by the Pakistan Meteorological Department, and cyclone alert signals were hoisted at ports. However, the effectiveness of these warnings has been widely questioned. Communication infrastructure in rural areas was weak. Many fishing boats remained at sea. Some coastal residents reportedly underestimated the severity of the storm, accustomed as they were to frequent cyclones. Scholars have noted that although warnings were technically disseminated, the system lacked clarity and reach. Signal flags and radio announcements did not translate into large-scale evacuation, particularly in isolated island communities. The cyclone made landfall on the evening of November 12, striking the coastal districts of Noakhali and Patuakhali before sweeping across the islands of Bhola, Tazamuddin, and Manpura. The most lethal element was not the wind alone but the storm surge. Fueled by the shallow bathymetry and the funneling shape of the bay, seawater surged inland in waves estimated between 20 and 30 feet in some locations. Low-lying islands were submerged within minutes. In Tazamuddin, later surveys suggested that up to 45% of the population perished. Across Bhola Island, entire communities were washed away. Livestock, essential to agrarian livelihoods, were largely destroyed. Crops nearing harvest were lost. Drinking water sources were contaminated by saltwater intrusion. Roads, bridges, and embankments were torn apart. Accurate casualty figures have always been difficult to establish. Early government estimates varied widely. International agencies later placed the death toll between 300,000 and 500,000 people. Some assessments have suggested that the number may have been closer to the higher end of that range. Regardless of the precise figure, the Bhola Cyclone remains widely recognized as the deadliest tropical cyclone in recorded history. In the days following landfall, communication breakdown compounded the crisis. Many affected areas were inaccessible by road or boat due to debris and flooding. Reports reaching Dhaka and Islamabad were initially fragmented. The scale of destruction only became clear as reconnaissance flights and relief teams surveyed the delta. Entire stretches of coastline had been stripped of vegetation. Survivors gathered on small patches of high ground, without shelter, food, or clean water. The government of Pakistan faced immediate scrutiny over its response. President General Yahya Khan was abroad at the time of the cyclone, and critics argued that the central administration reacted slowly. Relief supplies, including food and medical aid, began to arrive, but distribution was hampered by damaged infrastructure and limited coordination. International assistance was offered by numerous countries and organizations. India, despite political tensions with Pakistan, provided aid. The United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union also contributed relief supplies. Logistical challenges were immense. Helicopters and boats became primary means of delivering assistance to isolated islands. However, many survivors reported delays of several days before receiving help. The absence of sufficient cyclone shelters had forced residents to remain in vulnerable homes. In many communities, the only elevated structures were a few schools or government buildings, inadequate for the population size. The cyclone's economic impact was profound. It struck just before the winter rice harvest, destroying a substantial portion of the crop in the coastal belt. Fisheries were devastated. The loss of livestock further weakened rural households. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of homes were destroyed or severely damaged. The agricultural losses contributed to food shortages and rising prices in the months that followed. Public anger intensified as stories of suffering spread. In East Pakistan, perceptions of neglect by the central government deepened existing political grievances. The timing was critical. Pakistan was preparing for its first general election under universal adult franchise, scheduled for December 1970. In East Pakistan, the Awami League, led by Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, had campaigned on a platform of greater autonomy for the eastern wing. The cyclone became a defining issue in the election campaign. The Awami League criticized the central government's handling of disaster preparedness and relief, arguing that systemic underinvestment had left East Pakistan dangerously exposed. Observers have noted that the cyclone did not create political discontent, but it intensified and crystallized it. In the December elections, the Awami League won an overwhelming majority of seats in the National Assembly, securing nearly all constituencies in East Pakistan and an overall majority in the 300-seat parliament. Constitutionally, this victory entitled the party to form the national government. However, political negotiations between East and West Pakistani leaders quickly deteriorated. Tensions escalated over issues of autonomy and power sharing. In March 1971, the Pakistani military launched Operation Searchlight in East Pakistan, initiating a campaign to suppress Bengali nationalist aspirations. The conflict that followed, known as the Bangladesh Liberation War, lasted 9 months. By December 1971, after intervention by India, East Pakistan emerged as the independent nation of Bangladesh. While the causes of Bangladesh's independence were complex and rooted in long-standing political, economic, and cultural disparities, historians widely regard the Bhola Cyclone as a pivotal catalyst. The disaster exposed the vulnerability of East Pakistan and highlighted the imbalance in state response. It altered public perception at a critical political juncture and contributed to the momentum behind demands for self-governance. In the years following independence, Bangladesh undertook significant reforms in disaster management. Recognizing the delta's inherent exposure to cyclones, the government, with international support, invested in early warning systems, community preparedness programs, and the construction of cyclone shelters elevated above expected surge levels. The Cyclone Preparedness Program, launched in the 1970s with assistance from the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, trained volunteers to disseminate warnings and coordinate evacuations. Over decades, these measures have demonstrably reduced cyclone mortality rates in Bangladesh, even as storms continue to strike the region. Later cyclones of comparable meteorological strength have resulted in far fewer fatalities, illustrating the impact of improved forecasting, communication, and infrastructure. The Bhola Cyclone also influenced international disaster response practices. It underscored the importance of integrating local communities into warning systems and highlighted the consequences of uneven development within federal states. Academic studies of the cyclone have examined how social vulnerability, poverty, housing quality, access to information can transform a natural hazard into a large-scale human catastrophe. The environmental consequences persisted long after the waters receded. Salinity intrusion affected soil fertility in some areas, reducing agricultural productivity. Rebuilding efforts required not only reconstruction of homes but restoration of embankments and freshwater sources. Many families migrated inland in search of stability, altering demographic patterns in parts of southern Bangladesh. Memorials and commemorations in Bangladesh mark November 12 as a day of remembrance. Survivors' accounts collected over the decades describe the suddenness of the surge and the difficulty of rebuilding lives amid loss. Yet official documentation remains cautious, reflecting the challenge of reconstructing events in remote regions where records were sparse and entire communities were erased. The Bhola cyclone remains a reference point in global discussions of climate vulnerability. The Bay of Bengal continues to generate severe cyclones, and rising sea levels pose additional risks to low-lying delta regions. While it would be inaccurate to attribute the 1970 storm to contemporary climate trends, its legacy informs current policy debates about resilience and adaptation in densely populated coastal